So far, the educational approaches that questioned the traditional knowledge transmission model have generally centered upon providing learners with knowledge, helping release themselves from the shackles of power and become free, emancipated, independent. It appears, however, that this liberation process, while normally involving critical perception of power relations and inequalities, tends to treat learners' experiences as random and count on the capacities of the knowledgeable emancipator, teacher, in securing the learner's emancipation. This leaves learners tangled up in the mesh of power relations and dependence, and as a result, fails to transform established ideas. What may also be responsible for this resistance to change in education, apart from teachers' fundamental mistrust towards the experience of the student, as noted above, is the enlightenment-driven priority given to individual freedom and independence, often without the necessary societal changes. Such prioritizing essentially draws on a separation paradigm, according to which the universe consists of separate material entities, unrelated to our daily experiences, and the most important kind of knowledge is that which is rational, objective, universal, certain, and separate. We can therefore see that there's practically no room for connection, uncertainty, or subjectivity, all three seminal in contact with art and conceptual art par excellence, as we will try to show in today's presentation. In this paper, we espouse an interdependence approach, interdependence, which borders on a relational paradigm in the sense of multiple interconnected tracks, each of these tracks revealing a relationship which is more complex than that of one thing to another. This view is further supported by Latour's thesis on the importance of networks of attachments, as well as by his definition of emancipation, not as being freed from bonds, but instead as being well attached. In more tangible terms, we would define interdependence in accord with Horneff's notion of individual learners viewing each other's freedom as a condition for their own, and as a requirement for social freedom. A concomitant to this kind of interdependence is mutual recognition, and we would add compassion. Fleming discusses Mazirio's critical reflection and reciprocity within the framework of this idea of mutual recognition, which gives transformative learning a social dimension and can act as an interpersonal imperative. Following this line of thinking, one may also side with a scholar in reconfiguring Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed as the pedagogy of the misrecognized. In other words, a transformative, egalitarian perspective in education needs to incorporate mutual recognition and a revised approach to the self and the other. Next, we present some key features of contemporary conceptual art and explain how it may be associated with a reconceptualization of selfhood and austerity, as well as with the idea of interdependence and mutual recognition. So why conceptual art? In attempting to define conceptual art, Lawrence Weiner, a prominent artist, released a 1969 statement of intent. 1, the artist may construct the piece. 2, the piece may be fabricated. 3, the piece need not be built. Each being equal and consistent with the intent of the artist, the decision as to condition rests with the receiver upon the occasion of receivership. In other words, the artist asserted that a work of art may remain conceptual in language form or be created if so desired. Also, that the maker doesn't have to be an artist and that there is no right way to do it. Weiner's philosophy has been referred to as egalitarian, presumably in the sense that it adopts a fully democratic stance. The artwork may exist as a concept, it may remain in the form of words, the curator or the viewer may choose to do as they wish in relation to it, And if they decide to fabricate it, their work will not be judged as right or wrong. This open-endedness allows for a number of possibilities, which, combined with the fact that conceptual art is, as we saw in Weiner's statement above, art in the making, not prefabricated, is crucial for the synergy between the viewer and the artwork. In conceptual artworks, we also witness the synergy between the visual and the verbal component. In Digital Embrace, made in 2020 by the Danish artist I.A.K.E, for example, where the computer keys come out of a soft woolen suit while other keys melt together with the imprint of hands, we are told that warm, flexible skin meets cold and hard technology, and the limits between body and technology are transgressed. So this is a very contemporary, modern in the sense of contemporary comment on something very contemporary, a very contemporary, modern in the same sense, experience. That is the way we operate through computer keys and how work, I mean, the conveyor belt has been succeeded by something which is still a conveyor belt, but of a different type. The viewer's perception of the artwork is that it takes this transmodal visual verbal interplay into account. We are therefore presented with a complex science system within which viewers, in our case learner viewers, assign in their own right, engage in an identification process which may lead them to reconceptualize reality, and in so doing, reconceptualize themselves and the other in relation to it. In semiotic terms, the viewer and the artwork may be mutually determined as signs. In a sense, viewers become art in the making too, with their own personal narrative. The semiotically rich and open-ended interaction with this form of art could be seen as enabling learner viewers to act as agents, not as passive recipients, and process input critically. Moreover, boundaries among semiotic spaces or structures being permeable, according to Lodman, openness to alterity in the sense of alternative interpretations, alternative perceptions of reality, of the self and others, is reinforced. This makes viewers more likely to negotiate stereotypes and develop bonds of interdependence. It could be argued that, in a way, the interdependence of the verbal and the visual component of the artwork supports relationships of interdependence in the viewer. Let us now take a look at some data we have collected, indicating the impact of conceptual art on learner viewers. The data presented involve refugee and 15-year-old Greek learner voices as heard through the narratives composed by both groups in their interaction with conceptual artwork in a project of the Greek National Museum of Contemporary Art called Fast Forward into My Home. In the museum project, the narratives were meant to include personal experience interwoven with some of the artwork. And this was carried over by the researchers to the 54 Greek learners who visited the museum, were introduced to the same artworks, and were subsequently asked to compose their personal narratives, weaving in any of the artworks they felt were relevant. So they visited the museum, they saw the artworks, and they could pick those that seemed more relevant to their personal experiences of their narrative. The two sets of narratives are finally compared by learners themselves with the help of the researchers, and points of convergence or divergence were sought. It was hypothesized that convergence would be an indication of the bonding, mutual recognition effects of the dialogue with the conceptual artworks, as they were the common point of reference in the two groups' written output. A specific project may lend itself most readily to the convergence compassion idea by exploring the connections between the two sets of voices, but it also builds on prior data, other data we have collected, demonstrating learners' creativity and non-stereotypical divergent thinking with otherness traces enacting as virtual conceptual art museum curators. So students in another context were asked as conceptual art museum curators. What they produced was truly creative and significant to a different approximation of otherness in the self. So below is what follows is a selection of extracts from both groups' narratives. We've chosen to classify extracts by the artwork referred to. We reference two artworks out of a total of 10. With regard to the first artwork, Bill Viola's The Raft, a 2004 video sound installation portraying man's fight against tempest, viewers' narratives read as follows. Carlos, 25, from Syria, said, "Nothing can stop us from dreaming and making plans for our future, and we need to be determined, even if we fall, to get back and carry on." Nikki, a student, a 15-year-old student from Greece, said, "It's as if the people above the man lying are making a dream for him." So the people above the man lying are actually trying to somehow protect him. They're bonding with him. Beshir from Syria said, "The wave, this force that assaults them, it's telling them, wake up." Hassan, a student from Pakistan, said, "It reminds me of what I went through on my way from Turkey to Greece. I think he wants to show that we shouldn't be arrogant or brag about things. Like in the movie I saw about the Titanic." Nick, a Greek student, said, "I feel the pain. We should maintain our individual identity. We should be different but have a common purpose, chasing not profit, the joys of life and love for our fellow men." Rani, a Greek student, said, "Even for a moment, they're equal." These are all extracts from their narratives. They were much longer. Bibish, a 33-year-old lady from Congo, said, "People from different countries want to communicate, but then some outside force, like the water in the artwork we're talking about, comes and stops them. But also, even though there's violence in the way the water is attacking these people, at the same time, it's as if the water is waking them up." And Maria, a Greek student, stated, "People are showered with water, some accept their problems, while others struggle to solve them. In my life, I have fallen many times, but with effort, I was able to climb back up again." So we see that there is both sadness and...
We truly appreciate your insights. May I kindly ask you to move towards your including remarks?
Sorry, you can't hear me, you said. What was the comment? Sorry, I didn't get what you said.
Just a gentle reminder that we are close to the end of the allocated time.
Oh, yes, I'm finishing. Okay. So, as noted in students' comments, the experiential element is dominant in refugees' narratives. The voice captures the violence of the scene, yet this violence is not necessarily negative, since it can have an awakening effect. It also focuses on the profoundly existential, the need for dependence and support. Greek students' voice, by contrast, is touching, deeply philosophical at times, despite the age difference, but more distant generally, with the exception of Maria, who talks about her own life, personalizing the artwork. Still, the two voices have a common nucleus, possibly alluding to the ecumenical dimension of human experience, or is noted in a particularly interesting comment by one of the Greek students, "Art unites us." I'm not going to show you then the second artwork. The second artwork is here, but I won't be talking to you about the comments, the students' comments. But the interesting thing is that this ladder doesn't rest on the floor, and this gave rise to a lot of interesting comments. The impossible, the unachievable, the achievable. Interesting. While all narratives converge by pointing to the difficulties of climbing up, we can also see, as pointed out by students themselves, that refugees' thoughts are more optimistic than Greek students, despite the hardships they have experienced. As noted by one of the Greek students, with reference to Kostas Toklis's, that's another artist, Greek artist, artwork, The Harpooned Fish, but also as a comment on refugees' feelings. They are hurt, but still fight on for a better future. The points of convergence, as identified by learners themselves, may suggest that conceptual artworks created a space for a closer encounter, but it instilled a plurilingual, polyphonic frame of mind, which helped build a sense of dependence. In terms of the somewhat gross, but sadly still very relevant, ego, alter, culture, nature, culture-barbarism, binarism, if the host culture is the ego and immigrant culture stands for alterity, untamed nature, barbarism, both members of each pair seem to have made a step towards the other member. Even though the other may be expected to adapt to the host culture, as noted by one of the refugee participants who stated that when you leave your country to start a new life elsewhere, you've got to be able to adjust. The self-non-self opposition seems to have been attenuated in the process of identification and reconceptualization launched in the encounter with conceptual art. The network of associations and the multiple semiotic spaces created both within each group and between the two evidently invited opening up and generated compassion, leaving power relations aside. So, well, I'll end it at this point, even though my final statement was going to be limited with the final statement, that this is the way to help, this is a way, one of the possible ways to help learners an agent's role in this dialogue rather than being active, as usually happens in educational processes, which leads them to develop their critical thinking, question stereotypes, and articulate a discourse involving mutual recognition. Thank you very much.